Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today's screencast is going to focus on the era of Jacksonian democracy, which is a very influential and important time period in American history. It lasts from about the election of 1824, so about 1824 to about 1848. So today in our screencast, we're going to try and get introduced to what this time period means. So when people hear the era of Jacksonian democracy, they automatically think of Andrew Jackson, who the time period is named after. Now, that's correct. Andrew Jackson plays a big role in defining what this time period is about. But what you want to understand, there's two aspects to Jacksonian democracy. The first aspect is what changes are happening to American democracy before Andrew Jackson becomes the president that kind of allows someone like Andrew Jackson to become the president of the United States. So that's the first thing. Things before Jackson's presidency that are changing in America that kind of lead into and kind of allow someone like an Andrew Jackson to become president. So changes before his presidency. The second aspect of it are changes that are made kind of by Andrew Jackson, how he runs the government, how he exerts presidential power. So things that are changed after Andrew Jackson's presidency is also a part of Jacksonian democracy. So today we're really not going to evaluate Jackson himself too much. We're going to talk about what changes are made prior to Jackson's becoming president. He becomes president in 1828 that kind of allow more democratic ideas and the democratization of American government. Now, what I do want to talk about, Andrew Jackson is kind of a figure that divides a lot of people. Some people see him as a great hero. Some people see him as a great villain. He's kind of a love him or hate him kind of person and president. One nickname that I do want to kind of talk about with Andrew Jackson, during the time period, he's seen as, they call him a couple of different things. They'll call him the people's president, and they also call him like the champion of the common man. So how does Jackson get this nickname? Because that's really how he's viewed at the time. He's viewed as this person that's speaking for the average common American. So how does he get this identity? How does he get this persona in American life? Well, some of it's going to come from his background as a person. Andrew Jackson grows up very poor. He grows up in the Tennessee backcountry. He's orphaned by the age of 13. He really is our first president that grows up in true poverty, Andrew Jackson. He's of Scots-Irish descent. He's our first non-English president. So for everybody who's from the West, who's from the South, who's from the backcountry, who grows up not a part of the rich planter class, this elite class that Andrew Jackson kind of is in a lot of ways going to challenge, he's their guy. They look at him as like finally somebody from our part of the country, somebody from our background has made it. And that's how he gets this nickname, the champion of the common man and the people's president. So we're going to debate that, whether or not you think he is the voice of the people, whether he is the common person's president. But that's kind of an important aspect of Andrew Jackson and how he tries to frame himself as a president. Now, he's going to get his fame. He is a famous American by the time he becomes president, and he gets his fame from really winning great battles for America. First, the Battle of New Orleans in the War of 1812. Then Andrew Jackson is also instrumental in the Florida Wars, conquering Florida and kind of helping America to acquire Florida from the Spanish. So he's famous. He's a famous American, and a lot of people kind of see him as their voice in American politics. Now, so we're going to start with today's lecture or screencast is going to focus on prior to Jackson actually becoming president. So things are changing in American democracy. So the first thing that really kind of leads into Jackson's presidency is his first failed attempt to become the president, which becomes known as the corrupt bargain. So Andrew Jackson runs in the election of 1824. Now, if you look at the electoral map here, some things should stand out to you. The first thing is that there's 4 candidates who are running. So you have John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson, Henry Clay, and William Crawford. Now, each candidate wins several states. John Quincy Adams wins a lot of New England. Jackson wins a lot of the South, the West, even some northern states like Pennsylvania. Henry Clay wins a few states, and Crawford even wins a couple of states. So you have kind of a lot of this, all four candidates are winning electoral votes. So what happens here, if you look, nobody wins a majority of the electoral votes. Andrew Jackson wins the most electoral votes, but not the majority. He also happens to win the most popular vote, but also, again, not the majority. So the electoral votes are what counts. So in this case, when nobody wins a clear majority of the electoral votes, what they do is they throw the election to the House of Representatives. Now, what happened in the House of Representatives is the House of Representatives is going to choose John Quincy Adams as the president. This makes Andrew Jackson livid, incredibly angry that he's not chosen, because he feels like it's rightfully his position. He has the most electoral votes, the most popular vote, and so he kind of feels like he's been swindled out of the presidency. Now, he calls this a corrupt bargain, and what he thinks happened is very important. Jackson believes that Henry Clay, who was also trying to be the president, he's a very influential person in the House of Representatives. What he feels like happened is that Henry Clay used his influence in the House of Representatives to convince other congressmen to vote for John Quincy Adams and to not vote for Andrew Jackson. And so he feels like it was a kind of a corrupt bargain. And in return, what Henry Clay received was a position in John Quincy Adams' government. He became Secretary of State in John Quincy Adams' government, which was seen as kind of a stepping stone to the presidency. And so this is going to kind of create a contentious relationship. Andrew Jackson is going to say, you sold me out. You sold out the American people. I should have been the president. And Henry Clay, he kind of sees us behind that. And so this creates a divide in America. And after this, in the 1825, 1826, 1827, is when the Democratic Party is going to form. So Andrew Jackson is going to kind of break off and form his own political party, the Democrats, to try and challenge this one-party system that they have going. Eventually, Henry Clay is going to break off and form his own political party called the Whigs. And there you have kind of like the beginning of the two new political parties in American history, the second two-party system it's called. So this is kind of instrumental in changing the game and changing politics in America. It's similar to before. It's similar to, Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, but it's kind of a new era of politics. Now, things are changing in America as far as democracy and democratic impulses in the country. So the big question is who can vote and who cannot vote. If you look at 1800, so again, these are things that happened before Jackson becomes the president. If you look at 1800, in order to vote in a lot of states, you need to not only be of a certain age and be a man, but you also need to have certain property qualifications. So if you look at all these pink territories and states, you need to have pretty distinct property qualifications, or pay taxes, or both have property and pay taxes in order to vote. Now, if you look 30 years later, a lot of the states have changed. A lot of these states have taken away their property requirements and kind of allowed a much larger segment of their society to vote in elections. Now, this is a huge democratic change for the country. This is known as universal white male suffrage. They're changing who's allowed to vote, their voting requirements. So they're going from property ownership of a piece of land being key in order to be able to vote, to anyone who's a white male in the society being allowed to vote. So, as far as raw numbers are concerned, they're extending the suffrage to a lot more individuals. But, on the flip side, they're also restricting it in certain states. So, prior to this, in certain states, free black people who owned land could vote. Even in certain states, women could vote. So the shift is becoming that they're taking away property, but they're kind of putting race as a requirement. and solidifying gender as a requirement with who could vote in American society. So the term you want to be aware of is universal white male suffrage. So it's a democratic idea to a certain extent, but in other ways it's not as democratic. Now, another idea that's kind of being put out there is something known as popular sovereignty, which is, again, a change in philosophy. If you remember back to people like Alexander Hamilton and the Founding Fathers who wrote the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, the Founding Fathers were a little bit reluctant to go directly to the people, to have a form of direct democracy. But what starts to happen during this time period is the people want to have more of a say in the government, say what their representatives do. So this idea known as popular sovereignty starts to become a popular concept in the 1820s, 30s, and 40s. And what this means is, let's say there's a key issue going on in society. The one that really sticks out because they use it for this is going to be slavery. So instead of having Congress decide whether a state should be a slave state or a free state like they did with the Missouri Compromise, the idea of popular sovereignty is to go directly to the constituents, go directly to the people, and have them vote, have them decide whether they'd like to be a free state or a slave state. So it doesn't have to just apply to slavery. It could apply to anything. It could apply to temperance, banning alcohol. It could apply to, all kinds of things. But it's a more democratic impulse. Instead of having your representatives make decisions for you and speak for you, instead go directly to the constituents, let them vote on things. Let them vote on, make these decisions themselves. Now, where you see this happen first is in the popular election of electors. So when you look at the Electoral College kind of is really the group of people who actually elect the president. Now, in the past, most people don't realize that the Electoral College is actually a group of people that sit and actually elect the president in December. So it's not just a fictitious idea, it's actually a collection of individuals that sit and elect the president. Prior to the 1820s and 1830s, these people who went to the Electoral College were appointed by, usually their state legislatures appointed these people. So it was through kind of representatives that they were appointed. Instead, during this time period, it becomes much more popular and much more prevalent to have the people vote for who sits on the Electoral College. So again, it's an example of popular sovereignty, of taking it directly to the people, letting the people have more of a direct say in government. And that's kind of like the theme of the era. People getting more involved, going directly to the people to kind of solve problems and make decisions, trusting the people more. Now, another big change that happens is with how presidential candidates for a political party are chosen. So in this case, we're talking about, let's say, for example, our two political parties now, the Democrats and the Republicans. Our current system for how we choose our candidates to represent the political party is we have a primary system. So they go to each state, and the people kind of vote in each state to decide, who they want to represent their political party, whether it be the Democrats or the Republicans. Now, previously in history, early on, like in the 1790s and early 1800s, they used a system known as the caucus. And in a caucus, kind of the party leadership, the important people in the political party would sit in a room, maybe like 20, 30, 40 of them, and they choose amongst themselves who they thought would be the best representative of the political party. So what happens in this era is they shift from caucuses to these things called national conventions. And national conventions, it's not quite as democratic as the system we have now, which are the primaries, where the people get to vote directly. It's kind of like an in-between step. So you have like these huge arenas where maybe thousands of people might be, and you have delegates that represent different states, and they vote. They vote on who they think should represent the political party in election. So it's becoming more democratic. So it's moving in a more democratic way. More people are having their voices heard in kind of who's going to represent their political party. The last big thing that's gonna change during the time period uh, is Andrew Jackson in the election of 1828 is going to be our first presidential candidate who is going to actually actively campaign to be the president of the United States. So it creates the era of mass politics in the United States, where politics is kind of being brought to the masses through campaigning. So we kind of take it for granted that candidates campaign to be the president. And when you think about what campaigning is, they're trying to convince you that they're the best candidate for the job. They're the best person to, in this case, be the president. Before Andrew Jackson, politicians didn't do this. They didn't go out and campaign. But Jackson kind of revolutionizes, is kind of a revolutionary in this whole idea of popular campaigning and going out and trying to convince the masses of people to vote and to vote for him. Now, I chose this picture of Barack Obama kissing a baby on purpose, which really I find it kind of funny. Is in the first election, in these first campaigns, Andrew Jackson was out campaigning, and somebody gave him a baby on the campaign trail to, to kiss. And Andrew Jackson kind of like took one look at it and just like passed it off to the next person behind him. So things have changed. There's no cameras at that time. There's no video kind of catching this, this scene. So what you have happen, Andrew Jackson is going to win the election of 1828 in pretty substantial fashion. He wins the entire South, the entire West, even up into New York, like the Mid-Atlantic state. So it's a crushing victory, or a huge victory for Andrew Jackson. So his campaigning techniques are going to work. He's going to go out. His supporters are going to knock on doors, try and convince people to vote for him. He's going to go make speeches around the country. They're going to hold picnics, parties, to try and convince people to vote for the Democratic Party. Huge changes for the country. Now, Jackson has a unique appeal to him. He's a celebrity. Okay, people know him. He's a household name, and so he's gonna kind of have what I would call like a cult of personality behind him. He's loved by the people in the backcountry. Like I said earlier in the screencast, they view him as one of their own, like a voice of the people, a Westerner. He's different. He's the first non-English president. He's Scots-Irish. He's the first Westerner to be president. He's the first president who's not born into wealth. By the time Andrew Jackson is the president, he's a wealthy individual. He owns plantations. He owns slaves. He's a wealthy Southerner at that point. But when he's born, he's none of those things. He's born into basically complete poverty, and he kind of moves his way up. So he's that voice of the common person against the elite, against these people in Washington, D.C., who a lot of Americans, agrarian Americans, Westerners, Southerners, don't really trust. They don't trust the people in Washington, D.C. They don't think that they have their best interest at heart. So Jackson's campaign technique, and you can really attribute this to one of his closest campaign advisors who becomes his vice president and eventually becomes the president, Martin Van Buren. His technique is known as log cabin politics, and this is going to permeate the whole era of Jacksonian democracy. Log cabin politics is basically emphasizing your humble beginnings as a person, to try and connect with the voters, to show them that you're one of them, you're just like them. So for Jackson, he's like the American story. You know, he grows up poor and uses his skill, uses his talent to achieve great things in life and achieve fame. So to Americans of the 1820s, they kind of look at him as like the hero of what's possible in America. And that means kind of to them, anything's possible in America. And so you'll see candidates do this all the time. Like even our past candidates this past election, like Donald Trump even tried to do it to a certain extent, to say that he was kind of just like you. He got a small loan of $1 million from his father. So, I mean, in that case, it's kind of laughable, but in this case, it does kind of hold true and make sense. And this permeates the whole era. Other presidents are going to do this. So this is William Henry Harrison, who's a president later in the 1840s, outside of a log cabin. The reason it's called log cabin politics is because Andrew Jackson actually grew up in a log cabin, and a lot of these early presidents did, and it was a way to kind of say like, I'm like you, I'm middle class, or I'm poor, or I came from humble beginnings. So all these different things are changing during the era of Jacksonian democracy, and to a certain extent, America is becoming a more democratic country. Politics are becoming less elite and more open to the common man, to the common American. So very important things are changing in our country, and this should definitely help you for one of the essay questions that potentially could be on your test on Wednesday. Okay, I'll see you guys in class on Monday. Good luck with the assignment and studying for our test.